The first thing Seoul gave Tosin Adebayo was cold, not the polite chill of Lagos air conditioning, but a knife-edged wind that swept through Gangnam Station and bit into her skin like it owned the place. The second was noise, train announcements threading into car horns, neon signs buzzing in half English, half Hangul, the shuffle of thousands of feet chasing time. She stepped off the airport bus with her one stubborn suitcase dragging behind her, a folder of freshly printed CVs hugged tight to her chest like scripture. She had promised herself, over and over, that she would not cry. Not while texting her mother arrived safe. God is good. Not when she realized she was 6,500 miles from home, standing in a city where nobody knew her name. She would be brave. She would be early. She would be ready. Her small studio in Sinchon was barely wide enough to stretch both arms, but she shared it with her best friend Tolani, who had been in Korea a year longer. The room smelled faintly of instant ramen and ambition. The heater rattled. The window view was nothing more than the back of another building, but it was hers. It was where she would begin. That night, Tosin unpacked carefully, shoes lined under the bed, CVs placed on the desk like an altar, blouse pressed and folded for the morning. She set her alarm for 4:45 a.m. because the city, she knew, was a test. And the only answer she trusted was to be early. The next few days proved her right. Rejections came swiftly, emails so polite they almost mocked her. We'll be in touch. We'll circle back. Unfortunately, not at this time. Still, she ironed. Still, she greeted every receptionist with a smile, as though good morning were a key she might slip into the right lock one day. On the 7th day, she dragged her tired body home to find Tolani bouncing in excitement, clutching her phone. Look! Tolani thrust the screen in her face. The listing was almost bare. Executive assistant to CEO. Finance and operations background required. Resilience mandatory. Tosin blinked at the salary. It was more than triple what any of her other applications promised. Then she saw the address. Uido, Kong Group Tower. Glass and steel that pierced the sky above the Han River. Everyone in Seoul whispered about Kong Group, finance, tech, logistics, even shipping. A dynasty. A fortress. And the CEO, Tolani said, lowering her voice theatrically, Kong Min Jun. The press calls him Mr. Cold, arrogant, ruthless, untouchable. Dispatch Korea follows his every move. Welcome to Munlyt Stories, where Munlyt meets myth. Love timeless tales? Then hit like, subscribe, and join the circle. Every story begins with you. Tosin's chest tightened. She wasn't naive. Men like that devoured assistants like snacks. Still, her hand tightened around the CV folder. Apply, Tolani insisted. Worst case, he ignores you. Best case, destiny. So Tosin applied. She rewrote her cover letter, weaving in her audit internship, her association treasurer role, her ability to hold numbers steady when people shook. She wrote that she believed in preparation, that she refused shortcuts even when no one watched. Then she hit send. The reply came the next morning, stamped with inevitability. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring ID. Dress formal. Kong Group. Tosin's heart pounded. Seoul had given her cold and noise. Now, it was giving her fire. And tomorrow, she would walk straight into it. Seoul's skyline glittered like a crown the next morning, but Tosin barely noticed. Her alarm had shrilled at 4:45 a.m., the same hour her mother used to wake her back in Lagos to read under lantern light. Discipline, Mama Adebayo always said, was the bridge between dreams and destiny. By 6:30 a.m., Tosin was already in front of the mirror, smoothing the creases of her navy blouse. She tied her hair in a sleek bun, applied the barest touch of makeup, and slipped her folder of CVs into a neat leather tote. Today was not about beauty. It was about precision. When she met Tolani at the tiny kitchen table, her friend was chewing toast with an expression far too smug for the early hour. You know you're about to walk into the dragon's den, right? Tolani said. Then I'll be the fireproof one, Tosin replied, though her palms were clammy. Tolani grinned. Do you even know what Kong Min Jun is like? She pulled up an article on her phone. The headline glared. The Ice Prince of Uido, Kong Group's ruthless heir. Beneath it was a photograph of a man in a charcoal suit, his face carved into calm indifference. Arrogant, calculating, doesn't say thank you, Tolani read aloud. Fire staff without blinking. Dispatch Korea follows him like paparazzi at a royal wedding. Rumor says no assistant lasts longer than 3 months. Some, not even 3 days. Tosin exhaled slowly, her heart pounding like drums under the weight of the story. But she straightened her shoulders anyway. Let him try, she murmured. The Kong Group tower loomed above the Han River, a blade of glass and steel slicing into the Seoul sky. As Tosin stepped through the revolving doors, the chill inside the lobby wrapped around her like an expensive warning. Polished marble reflected her heels, while a reception desk gleamed like a throne. "You're early," the receptionist said after scanning her appointment code. 58th floor. Elevator on the right. Tosin's legs trembled, but she kept her back straight as she entered the mirrored elevator. Numbers climbed, 45, 52, 57. Her reflection looked calm, but inside, memories flickered. Her mother teaching her to balance a water bucket. Her father's cracked hands after the workshop, turning her flashcards one by one. Stay steady, Tosin, even when the road is sand. When the door slid open, a woman in a navy dress appeared instantly, tablet in hand. "Ms. Adebayo, HR. This way." The hallway stretched like a gallery of glass. Beyond it, the Han River glittered in the sunlight, vast and indifferent. They ushered her into a quiet room with a single desk, laid a test in front of her, spreadsheets, calendar puzzles, quick reconciliations. She sharpened her pencil in her mind and worked steadily. She was double-checking her last entry when the door opened without a knock. And the air shifted. Authority walked in wearing a black suit that seemed tailored by silence itself. He didn't glance around the room. He didn't need to. Kong Min Jun had arrived. The man who entered did not announce himself. He didn't need to. Kong Min Jun carried silence like a weapon, and the room obeyed him. Tosin rose instinctively. Her first thought was that the photographs hadn't lied. He was striking, tall, sharp-edged, but colder in person than any camera could capture. His second was that he looked at people the way an auditor looked at numbers, not for who they were, but for what they proved. He sat, not across from her, but at the head of the table, a quiet correction of power. He opened the slim folder containing her CV and skimmed it with a glance, so fast she wondered if he absorbed entire paragraphs at once. "Name," he said. "Tosin Adebayo," she replied, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "Accountancy," he noted. "Why Seoul?" She hesitated only a breath. "Because the hardest problems live here, and I like work that fights back." His eyebrow twitched upward, a fraction, but enough to suggest she'd crossed from predictable to interesting. "This role is not accounting," he said. His tone was like glass against stone. "I understand people, budgets, and time," Tosin answered. "I can triage. I can listen. And I don't panic under pressure." His gaze was winter itself. "You will panic if I want you to." "Better than being ignored," she countered softly. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Beyond the window, the Han River glittered like a dare. Without another word, he slid a tablet across the table. On it was a draft email to a board member, brutally blunt about a delayed environmental report. "Fix it," he said. 2 minutes. Then tell me why my 11:30 with the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure must move without insulting him. Tosin read quickly, her mind racing. The draft was efficient but dangerously rude. She reshaped it. Context before request, accountability before apology, trimmed the edges without dulling the truth. Then she added 3 options for rescheduling: a Friday working breakfast at the minister's office, a brief corridor update at the upcoming infrastructure forum, or a virtual meeting with pre-circulated memos to honor his time. She pushed the tablet back. Min Jun scanned her work, unreadable. "How did you know about the forum?" "The poster in the lobby," she said calmly. "And the minister prefers Fridays. There's a public interview about it." He regarded her with the stillness of a man measuring not just answers but the steel behind them. Finally, he rose. "HR will send the offer. Start tomorrow, 6:30 a.m. Tosin blinked. "Sir." "You will earn the rest," he said, and left the room without a backward glance. When the door shut, Tosin let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands shook once, then steadied. Seoul had given her cold, noise, and rejection. Now, it had given her a storm in a tailored suit. And tomorrow, she would meet it at the door. The Kong Group tower loomed above the Han River like a blade catching dawn. By 6:12 a.m., Tosen was already in the lobby, clutching her leather tote and rehearsing her promise to herself. Arrive early, stay steady, never lose your composure. The HR officer met her as she stepped off the elevator on the 58th floor. "Mr. Kong asked that you wait in his office," the woman said briskly. It wasn't even 6:30. Tosin followed the carpeted corridor into a room that could have belonged to any CEO in the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Seoul's skyline, a black glass desk bare except for a silver pen, bookshelves lined with law and finance, and a lounge of leather couches arranged with military precision. It was a space that forgave no clutter, no hesitation. At 6:23, the door opened. Kong Min Jun walked in, suit crisp enough to cut paper. He carried a stack of thick board reports and dropped them onto the desk with a muted thud. "These are this week's packets. Cross-check the numbers with the Q2 summaries on the server archive." His gaze flicked to her. "I don't repeat myself." Tosin's heart lurched, but she moved without protest to the desk. The computer was already logged into the company drive, a labyrinth of subfolders coded by quarter and project. She inhaled, rolled her shoulders back, and began. Columns of numbers blurred into each other, but she forced herself into rhythm. Scan, cross-verify, annotate. She whispered sums under her breath, the way she had as a university treasurer in Lagos. By 7:20, she had flagged 5 inconsistencies, 2 minor, 3 serious enough to raise eyebrows in a boardroom. When she slid the annotated sheets across the desk, Min Jun skimmed them, then lifted his eyes. "Who told you I have a board meeting at 9? "It's on the corporate calendar," Tosin replied evenly. "And 3 of your executives wore their battle ties in the lobby." His gaze lingered on her for a beat unreadable. "Noted." The rest of the morning unfolded like a storm on fast forward. He dictated emails at a pace that made shorthand feel clumsy. She had to move a lunch with the Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport without making it sound like a demotion, book a last-minute site visit at Incheonport, and prepare briefing notes for a compliance update, all while anticipating his next 3 demands before they left his mouth. Her legs ached from chasing him through glass-lined corridors. Her mind burned from calculations and contingencies. Yet, she refused to let him see her falter. Every yes, sir, came steady, every adjustment seamless. By 7:41 p.m., the floor had emptied. Lights flickered off across the tower, but Min Jun's office still glowed. Tosin packed her tote, exhausted yet quietly proud. As she reached the doorway, his voice cut through. "Tomorrow, 6:30. Don't be late." It was the closest thing to good night she would ever get. Outside, Seoul's night hummed with neon and possibility. Tosin exhaled, her body trembling with fatigue. She had survived day 1, and she hadn't burned. Not yet. By the end of her first week, Tosin realized the Kong Group's 58th floor ran on laws no handbook dared to print. They were not announced, but they were as binding as contracts. She pieced them together in the quiet moments between crises, the way a child learns rhythm from the beat of a drum. Rule 1. Never make Min Jun repeat himself. His words dropped like currency, and once spent, they were not offered again. On her second day, when she asked him to clarify a figure, he simply stared at her until the silence burned hotter than any reprimand. She learned then, listen the first time, catch the detail, hold it fast. Rule 2. Anticipate, don't react. When a logistics manager called with a delay at Incheonport, Tosin didn't wait for Min Jun to bark instructions. She gathered the shipping logs herself, circled the problem, and had 3 possible solutions typed and printed before he stepped out of his call. His glance at the papers was sharp, approving without words. Rule 3. If you must argue, win, but make him believe the victory was his. Once, in a scheduling conflict with the Deputy Minister of Finance, Tosin suggested a discreet corridor briefing instead of canceling outright. Min Jun raised a brow, dismissed it, then repeated the idea to the minister as if it had been his all along. Tosin only smiled. A win was still a win. Rule 4. Silence is sometimes the safest answer. Colleagues often tested her, sliding comments about the Nigerian girl with too much confidence. She learned not to flinch, not to bite back. Her silence carried its own weight, and eventually, they backed down. Rule 5. Time was the only coin Min Jun respected. He spent it ruthlessly, demanded it be saved in seconds, not minutes. Tomorrow, 6:30, was not a suggestion, it was a law. And Tosin obeyed, arriving earlier each day, her body adjusting to Seoul's brutal rhythm. By the close of her second week, she no longer felt like an intruder. She had become the quiet axis around which his schedule turned. Emails moved faster because she filtered them. Meetings stayed intact because she managed their edges. Even the board members, once indifferent, began to nod in her direction when she entered a room. But not everyone was pleased. During a strategy session, the head of marketing, a man too slick for his own good, snapped. She hovers like she runs the place. The room froze. Min Jun didn't lift his eyes from the report. She runs my office, he said flatly. Which means she runs the part of this company that keeps your deadlines from imploding. Do you have a problem with that? The man muttered something about joking, but Tosin caught the flicker of respect in the eyes around the table. She understood then. She wasn't just surviving. She was altering the gravity of the 58th floor. And Min Jun, the so-called Ice Prince, had noticed. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came in. A supplier from Incheonport was already defensive, his voice spilling excuses down the line. Customs backlog, unexpected inspections, nothing we could do. The shipment delay was out of our hands. Tosin listened quietly, pen moving across her notepad. She had learned that silence unnerved liars more than interrogation. When the man finally ran out of breath, she said politely, "Please forward the shipping logs and clearance forms." An hour later, they sat in her inbox. She studied them line by line, her training in accountancy snapping into focus. Customs had stamped clearance on the original date. The problem wasn't the port. It was the supplier's own dispatch team. They hadn't even loaded the containers until 3 days later. By 10 a.m., Tosin walked into Min Jun's office, documents neatly arranged. He looked up briefly, irritation already in his gaze, as if expecting her to parrot excuses. "They lied," Tosin said simply, sliding the papers across his desk. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the evidence. "You verified this twice." "Yes. Their stamp is clear. The delay wasn't customs, it was their dispatch team." Silence filled the room, taut as a string. Min Jun leaned back in his chair, regarding her as though she'd broken a code no one else had dared to crack. "Most people would have brought me the excuse," he said finally. "Most people don't like delivering bad news," Tosin replied. "And you. I prefer problems solved before they land on your desk." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, with the calm precision of a man who decided the fate of empires before breakfast, he said, "Inform procurement to terminate their contract. Effective immediately." Tosin nodded, already drafting the termination memo in her mind. She didn't allow herself to smile, but inside she felt the faint pulse of triumph. That afternoon she noticed a change. Min Jun no longer dictated every detail of his instructions. Instead, he handed her tasks with fewer words, trusting she would know how to fill the gaps. "Arrange the Jeju trip," he said once, without times or names. She researched the flight delays common on Fridays, booked the earliest outbound, padded his schedule with buffer slots, and ensured the return avoided peak congestion. When he saw the itinerary, he only said, "Good." 2 letters, clipped and rare. But from Kong Min Jun, they were gold. Not everyone shared his approval. Later that week, in the break room, 2 senior managers muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "She's too eager. She won't last." None of them do. Tosin sipped her coffee, lips pressed into a quiet smile. Let them talk. She wasn't here to survive their gossip. She was here to rewrite their expectations. And if Min Jun noticed, if the cold CEO himself had begun to respect her work, that was just another battlefield won. By her 3rd week at Kong Group, Tosin began to notice the eyes. Not the respectful nods from receptionists or the cautious glances from junior staff. These were older eyes, seasoned, calculating, watching her as though she were an intruder who had wandered onto sacred ground. It started small. A senior analyst forgot to copy her on meeting notes. A department head deliberately scheduled briefings without sending her the agenda. Even the office assistant whispered behind her back, "She won't last, none of them ever do." Tosin told herself she didn't mind. She had grown up in Lagos, where markets were battlegrounds and you learned to hold your place in the crowd. But she also knew silence could sometimes be permission, and she had no intention of granting permission to anyone who wanted her gone. The breaking point came during a strategy meeting. The room was filled with the usual parade of suits, directors, consultants, and division heads circling slides projected on the glass wall. Tosen sat quietly near Min Jun, tablet in hand, noting action points. When she spoke up to clarify a discrepancy in the financial forecast, the head of marketing, a slick man named Han Dae-shik, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Careful," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "If you keep hovering like that, people will think you run the place." A few nervous chuckles rippled around the table. Tosin froze, her pen still against the screen. She could feel every pair of eyes slide toward Min Jun. He didn't look up from the report he was reviewing. His voice was calm, even, but sharp enough to slice through glass. "She does run the place. My office. Which means she runs the part of this company that ensures your deadlines don't collapse. Do you have a problem with that?" Silence. Han Dae-shik's smirk faltered. "I was only joking," he muttered. "Then learn better jokes," Min Jun said, turning a page as though the matter were closed. The meeting resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Tosin sat straighter, her notes steady, her expression neutral. Inside, though, something warmed. It wasn't pride, it was recognition. She wasn't just the assistant anymore. She was a presence to be accounted for. Later that day, Tolani called her during lunch break. "Girl, Dispatch just dropped another gossip piece about him. Guess what headline? Kong Min Jun freezes out another investor at banquet. They act like he's some villain from a drama." Tosin smiled faintly into her coffee. "He's not easy to work with. But he's precise. Precise or arrogant? Both," Tosin admitted. "But he values results. That's rare." Tolani laughed. "Be careful. That kind of respect can melt into something else." Tosin didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes and replayed the moment in the boardroom when Min Jun had defended her without hesitation. Enemies in suits were expected, but allies in unexpected places, those could change everything. The 58th floor was its usual machine of motion, phones ringing, assistants hurrying, executives darting in and out of glass-walled offices. But that Tuesday morning, the machine faltered. At precisely 8:10 a.m., Min Jun strode from his office, phone pressed to his ear, expression carved into stone. "Cancel everything," he said as he passed Tosin's desk. "All morning meetings. Reschedule without excuses. I'll be gone all day." She opened her mouth to ask where, but the elevator doors closed before she could speak. By noon, whispers floated through the building like cigarette smoke. "His sister, hospital accident." HR murmured. A project manager whispered that it was serious, that Min Jun hadn't left her side. Gossip swirled, but Tosin forced herself to shut it out. She'd learned quickly speculation was poison. Facts were her oxygen. Still, when she packed her bag at 7 p.m., she caught herself staring at his dark office. For the first time, it felt less like a fortress and more like an absence. He returned 3 days later, long after sunset. Tosin was still at her desk, reviewing logistics reports. The elevator chimed, and Min Jun stepped out, jacket slung over his arm, tie loosened, eyes ringed with exhaustion. She rose immediately. "Mr. Kong." "She's stable," he cut in, his voice low but steady. "Broken ribs, mild concussion. She'll recover." Relief softened Tosin's chest, though she didn't show it. "Do you need me to?" "Sit," he said, surprising her. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. The city glowed behind him, neon shimmering over the Han like a restless heartbeat. For a moment, he simply looked past it, his jaw tight. Then he spoke, not as a CEO but as a brother. "Tae-hee is the only family I have left who matters," he said quietly. "I can't be at the office the way I usually am, which means I need someone who will keep the building from collapsing while I'm not here." Tosin leaned forward. "Tell me what to protect." He glanced at her, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. "Gratitude. Trust. It was gone before it settled. I'll call twice a day. Anything urgent, you decide if I should know. Don't let anyone use my absence as an excuse." She nodded. "Understood." The next week tested her in ways she hadn't imagined. Board members sniffed for weakness, hoping to delay projects. Department heads grew bold with excuses. Clients pressed for reassurance. Tosen became the quiet hinge, holding the office doors steady. She intercepted complaints before they reached his phone. She reminded restless executives of standards he would not forgive. She even mediated a clash between procurement and operations, her calm voice slicing through their shouting until they grudgingly agreed. One evening, she carried documents to his temporary workspace at the hospital. Through the glass, she saw him sitting by his sister's bed. Tae-hee, pale but awake, scrolled her phone with a faint smile. "This is Tosin," Min Jun said softly. "My assistant, the one who keeps him from throwing phones." Tae-hee teased. "I try," Tosin said, smiling back. As she left, Min Jun walked her to the hallway. "You didn't have to come," he murmured. "You didn't have to tell me about her," Tosin replied. His expression shifted. Acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude, but then the steel returned. "Go home. Get some rest." For the first time, Tosin glimpsed the man behind the marble, and it unsettled her more than the arrogance ever had. Seoul moved at its usual relentless speed, but inside Kong Group, time had changed its rhythm. With Min Jun spending most of his days at the private hospital in Jamsil, Tosin became the pulse of the 58th floor. She arrived before dawn, her bun neat, her blouse pressed, her mind braced. Every hour brought another test, directors questioning her authority, clients sniffing out weakness, junior staff whispering about the Nigerian assistant running the tower. Yet deadlines held. Reports arrived on time. Meetings ran without imploding. She had learned to use Min Jun's own authority like a borrowed blade. Sharp, swift, unquestionable. Still, she knew the weight she carried wasn't hers alone. She felt it each time the phone rang from the hospital. Twice a day his number appeared. Some calls were pure orders. Reschedule the minister. Approve the Jeju contract. Keep procurement in line. Others were quieter. "Anything I should know?" he asked once, his voice low enough that she could hear the hum of medical machines in the background. Her answer was steady. "It's under control." One night, long past office hours, Tosin delivered contracts to his temporary workspace at the hospital. She knocked lightly, then pushed the door open. Min Jun sat by the bed, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, his tie abandoned on the table. His sister Tae-hee was awake, scrolling her phone with a faint smile. "This is Tosin," he said to his sister. "The reason I haven't fired the entire finance division yet." Tae-hee chuckled softly. "Then I owe you. He's impossible when he's stressed." "I've noticed," Tosin replied, lips quirking despite herself. When she turned to leave, Min Jun followed her into the hallway. His shoulders looked heavier than she'd ever seen, as though arrogance itself had been set aside for the night. "You didn't have to bring these yourself," he said. "As long as the job gets done," Tosin answered evenly. For a moment, the air between them softened. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke again. "Do you know why I hate wasting time?" Tosin blinked, caught off guard. "Because it slows progress." His gaze shifted to the floor, jaw tightening. "Because it's the one thing you can't buy back. I watched someone I cared about waste theirs. By the time I understood, it was gone." The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. She had never heard him sound so human. Before she could respond, he straightened, the mask sliding back into place. "Send the contracts to legal," he said, turning away. That night, Tosin walked out into the cold Seoul air, her breath clouding in the dark. She thought about the man behind the marble, the one who hid grief behind precision, who wore arrogance like armor but sometimes let the seams show. It unsettled her more than the boardroom battles ever could, because now she wasn't just defending her place in Kong Group. She was beginning to see the man she was defending it for. Rain swept across Seoul like a curtain, streaking the glass walls of Kong Group Tower. From the 58th floor, Tosin watched drops race each other down the window before her desk phone lit up. "Boardroom." "Now," Min Jun's clipped voice commanded. She grabbed her tablet and hurried down the corridor. The long glass table in the boardroom was already crowded. Directors in dark suits, assistants hovering, papers spread like weapons. At the far end stood Kong Min Jun, posture sharp, ice colder than the weather. On the wall screen, a headline glared in bold. Kong Group under fire. Delays at Incheon terminal. Costs surge on East-West link. Beneath it were leaked figures that exaggerated overruns and painted the company as crumbling. Whispers rose among the directors. "We need a statement immediately," one insisted. "If we don't respond, the market will punish us," another warned. "And who leaked these numbers?" a third demanded. "Those figures weren't public." Min Jun didn't flinch. His voice sliced through the noise. "We will not issue a rushed statement just to look busy. We respond when we control the facts." The room buzzed with dissent. Then, his gaze flicked to Tosen. "Status, both projects." Every eye in the room turned to her. She felt the weight of it. The skepticism, the doubt, the quiet question. What is she doing here? She tapped her tablet, projecting her notes onto the wall screen. Incheon delays stem from environmental clearance backlogs. According to our documents, the final approval is due within 2 weeks. As for the East-West expansion, procurement secured alternative suppliers last week. Updated cost projections reduced the overrun by nearly 15% compared to the figures in that leak. The room fell quiet. One director adjusted his glasses. "Where did you get those numbers?" "I requested them directly from project managers yesterday," Tosin replied, her tone calm, professional. "Their reports arrived this morning." Min Jun's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper, almost satisfaction. "This is why we don't panic," he said. "We speak when we can prove the story wrong." The rest of the meeting passed in clipped exchanges and recalibrated strategies. When it ended, the directors filed out, their eyes lingering on Tosen longer than before. As she walked beside Min Jun back to his office, she braced herself for critique. "Instead," he said, "you just made enemies in there." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not here to win a popularity contest." His mouth twitched, the closest thing she'd seen to amusement. "Good. You're here to win wars." That night, when Tosen stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The neon lights of Uido glowed against wet asphalt, reflecting like a second city beneath her feet. She clutched her umbrella, her heart steady. For the first time since stepping into Kong Group, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like a soldier in the storm. The invitation came without explanation. Late afternoon, Min Jun stepped out of his office, jacket already buttoned, phone pressed to his ear. 8 o'clock. Cheongdam. "Private dining room," he said, barely glancing at Tosen. "You're coming." Her pen froze mid-note. "Sir?" "To the dinner. You know the numbers better than half this board. You'll take notes." And just like that, the matter was settled. "Thank you so much for staying with us till this very point in the story. If you're enjoying it, please don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear the lessons you learned from this story and your thoughts on how we can keep improving to bring you the very best." By evening, the rain had slowed to a silvery drizzle. Seoul's Gangnam district glittered like a jewel box under neon, its streets alive with foreign cars and silk dresses. Tosen followed Min Jun through the discreet entrance of a boutique hotel in Cheongdam-dong. Inside, the private dining room smelled faintly of sandalwood. Crystal glasses sparkled under low lighting. At the head of the table sat the Minister of Land and Infrastructure, flanked by 2 aides. Min Jun greeted him with a curt nod, then slid into his seat as though the room bent to his presence. Tosen quietly positioned herself beside him, tablet ready, heart racing. Business began before the first dish was served. Min Jun spoke in the measured tones of a man accustomed to commanding silence. With numbers, he was exact, with vision, expansive, with deadlines, ruthless. Tosen typed furiously, her notes crisp and structured. She noticed the way his tone shifted depending on the audience, sharp when he wanted obedience, smooth when he wanted cooperation. To the minister, he was neither subservient nor arrogant, just immovable, like stone negotiating with water. At one point, the minister turned toward Tosen, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "And you are?" She straightened. "Tosin Adebayo, executive assistant to Mr. Kong." "New." She forced her smile steady. "Today marks 3 weeks." A flicker of surprise crossed the minister's face, followed by a faint nod. Out of the corner of her eye, Tosen saw Min Jun glance at her, almost as though evaluating her response. The courses came and went, grilled abalone, steamed crab, kimchi aged longer than her time in Seoul. Tosin barely tasted any of it. She was too focused on capturing every clause of the agreement being shaped. Supply chain adjustments, regulatory assurances, commitments to shared press statements. By the time the dinner ended, her notes read like a blueprint for the next 6 months of the company's future. On the drive back along the Han River, the city lights shimmered against the wet asphalt, casting reflections like broken stars. Min Jun loosened his tie slightly, leaning back in the leather seat. "You handled yourself well," he said without looking at her. Tosin blinked. Praise from him was as rare as rain in December. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me," he replied, voice low. "You earned it." She turned her gaze to the river outside, her chest tightening with something she didn't want to name. The city flowed endlessly, but for the first time, she felt she was not just surviving in its current. She was beginning to swim in it. It was supposed to be a quick stop. Tosin carried a slim folder of contracts through the quiet luxury of Min Jun's penthouse in Asserting, the city glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was close to 9 p.m., and she had promised herself she'd be home in 20 minutes. She was mid-sentence, explaining a clause about delivery penalties, when the lights died. A soft thunk, then silence. The city beyond the glass went dark, towers flickering out one by one until even the Han River bridges were swallowed by shadow. Seoul, usually electric, had collapsed into stillness. Min Jun frowned, crossing to the window. "Grid failure," he muttered. "Backup generators should." They didn't. The penthouse remained cloaked in silence. Tosin instinctively reached for her phone, but the screen stayed black. Battery dead. She cursed herself silently. "I'll get candles," she said, moving toward the kitchen. "You know where I keep them?" His voice carried a trace of surprise. "You don't strike me as the type who enjoys sitting in the dark," she answered lightly, opening a drawer and finding exactly what she expected, a row of neatly arranged emergency supplies. Within minutes, warm candlelight flickered across marble and steel, softening the sharp lines of the penthouse. Shadows danced against Min Jun's face, blurring the edges of his usual severity. Most people would have panicked in such darkness. Tosin didn't. "I grew up in Lagos," she said, placing a candle on the coffee table. "Power outages were normal. We didn't panic. We just made it work." His gaze followed her as she moved through the room. "I didn't grow up with that problem." "I know," she said quietly. "You've told enough stories about boarding schools with their own generators." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not irritation, not arrogance, curiosity. "What else do you know about me?" he asked. Tosin set down the last candle before answering. "Public facts. You took over Kong Group at 29. You don't keep assistants longer than a quarter, and you treat time like it's a scarce mineral. Private guesses. You're loyal to the few people you let close. You notice everything but pretend you don't. And arrogance is the armor you wear so people don't ask the wrong questions." Silence stretched. The candlelight softened him, revealed something almost human beneath the marble. "You're not wrong," he said finally. "But you left one thing out." "What's that?" "I don't like being alone when it's this quiet." They ended up on the couch, the folder of contracts forgotten on the table. Without the constant hum of devices, the room felt smaller, warmer. Min Jun poured 2 glasses of water. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the city's blackout pressing around them. When the generators finally hummed to life at 11:30, the flood of white light felt almost intrusive. Tosin gathered her things. "I'll call a cab," she said. "I'll have the driver take you," he replied firmly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Min Jun." He paused, then answered, "Good night, Tosin." As the elevator doors closed, she realized the blackout hadn't just cut the power. It had stripped away a layer of distance neither of them had dared touch before. The whispers reached Tosin before the news did. She had barely stepped into Kong Group's marble lobby at 6:20 a.m. when she felt it, the sideways glances, the 2 sudden silences as she passed. By the time she reached her desk, a printout waited like a snake coiled in the middle of her workspace. The headline screamed from Dispatch Korea, "CEO Kong Min Jun's secret relationship with his assistant, photos inside." Beneath it were grainy telephoto shots from the private dinner in Cheongdam. The angle twisted the truth. Her head bent over notes, his leaning slightly closer. In still frames, it looked the article implied favoritism, like a secret whispered between hinted she had been chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with merit. She had expected gossip. The elevator chimed, but not like this. Min Jun walked out, not with photos as precise as ever, though his jaw was set like stone. Without a word, he tossed his own copy of the printout onto her desk. My office. Now. Inside, he closed the door with a controlled click. Do you know who could have taken these? Anyone at the hotel, Tosin replied, forcing her voice steady. But Dispatch doesn't pay for blurry photos unless someone sells the story. His eyes darkened, which means someone in this company or the minister's circle. Tosin folded her arms. So what's the plan? You stay quiet, he said coldly. Let me handle it. Her head snapped up. Stay quiet? Do you understand what this makes me look like? That I slept my way into this job? That everything I've worked for is a joke? His voice softened but carried weight. Better they think that then. He stopped, breath sharp. Then what? She pressed. His gaze met hers, unflinching. Then knowing how much you matter here. The words rattled her, but only for a second. No. If I stay, it won't be as a shadow behind you. You want me here? Then clear my name. Publicly. By noon, the story had spread to 2 business blogs. HR sent cautious emails about reputational risk. A board member called to suggest temporary reassignment for optics. Min Jun's response was a clipped, not happening. At 1, Tosin walked back into his office, resignation letter in hand. If you won't fight this, I will. By leaving. He rose from behind the desk, steps measured but fierce. You're not leaving. Not because of a lie. Not because some coward thinks they can weaponize you. Her voice was quiet but unyielding. If I stay, it's on my terms. Public defense. No decisions about me behind closed doors. For a long moment, the silence burned. Then, slowly he nodded. Done. That evening, Seoul's skyline glittered with rumors. But Tosin walked out of Kong Group with her back straight. If the city wanted whispers, let it whisper. She had forced the Ice Prince of Uedo to take her side, and tomorrow the board would hear it loud and clear. The boardroom was fuller than usual the next morning. Word of the gossip scandal had spread beyond the glass tower, and every department head who mattered had come to watch. Tosin sat at one end of the long table, hands folded on her lap, her resignation letter burning a silent weight in her tote. At precisely 9 o'clock, the double doors opened and Kong Min Jun entered. He didn't stride. He cut through the room like a blade through silk, his navy suit immaculate, his face unreadable. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table, looked around, and began. Yesterday's rumors were not only false, he said, his voice carrying with lethal calm. They were an insult to this company and to the professionalism of my assistant, Miss Tosin Adebayo. The room stilled. She was hired on merit, Min Jun continued. Her work has improved the efficiency of this office and the stability of our operations. Anyone who doubts that can begin with the last 3 months' performance reports. She stays. That is final. A murmur swept through the directors, quickly silenced by his tone. No one dared push further. Tosin felt her breath catch. She had demanded public defense. Here it was, not whispered, not softened, but written into the air of the company's highest chamber. One director cleared his throat. For clarity, Mr. Kong, do you deny any impropriety between yourself and Ms. Adebayo? Min Jun's eyes sharpened. I deny the insult. She is not a rumor. She is my assistant, and she is indispensable. That is the only fact that matters here. It wasn't a softening. It was a shield. And it was enough. By afternoon, the gossip sites had updated their articles. Dispatch Korea, so quick with innuendo, now carried the clipped headline. Kong Group denies rumors. CEO defends assistant's professionalism. The whispers in the office corridors shifted tone. Where yesterday they had been laced with ridicule, today they were edged with wariness, even respect. No one could deny what they'd seen. Min Jun, the man who rarely acknowledged anyone, had drawn a line around her. Later that evening, Tosin returned to her desk, exhaustion pooling in her bones. Min Jun appeared in her doorway, a faint shadow of something softer crossing his expression. You forced me, he said quietly. She looked up, steady. I asked for respect. And you got it, he admitted, his voice low. Don't get used to me being sentimental. I wouldn't dream of it, Tosin replied, though the corner of her mouth betrayed her. For the first time since the scandal broke, she felt the ground beneath her feet solid again. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about shaping the battlefield on her own terms. The scandal faded faster than Tosin expected. Within a week, the whispers in Kong Group's corridors quieted, and board members stopped watching her with veiled suspicion. Efficiency had a way of silencing gossip. Results wrote the louder story. Yet something had changed. It was in the way Min Jun began giving her tasks without full instruction, trusting her to fill in the blanks. It was in the way his gaze lingered a second too long when she presented solutions, as if trying to decipher not just her work but the woman behind it. One Tuesday morning, he summoned her with a single word. Calendar. She stepped forward, reciting smoothly. Audit committee at 9, environmental compliance at 11:15, working lunch with the Minister of Finance at 1. Cancel lunch. Her pen hovered. Should I reschedule? Cancel means cancel, he said flatly. Tosin adjusted her notes without sighing. I'll call his office. I'll send an apology letter, written so he feels flattered, not dismissed. That drew the faintest flicker of interest in his eyes. You know the difference. I've had practice, she replied, tone even. Later that afternoon, he called her into his office. A stack of correspondence waited on his desk. Sit, he said, not unkindly. She took the chair opposite him, poised, pen ready. I'll dictate a letter. Listen. Write exactly as I say. Names, figures, clauses. He spoke fast, sharp, like someone throwing knives. Tosin caught each one, her hand moving in sync. When he finished, she read the letter back word for word. For the first time, his composure cracked by a fraction. No one else has ever done that on the first try. Perhaps you were speaking more clearly than usual, she said, a touch of mischief in her tone. His mouth twitched, an aborted smile, half human and half hidden. You're making me predictable. Or efficient, she countered smoothly. He studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A short, low sound, startling in its warmth. It disappeared as quickly as it came, but Tosin felt it echo in her chest. By evening, the shift had settled into the air between them. When a furious client called about a late payment, Tosin traced the delay to a missing signature in finance, resolved it, and emailed proof before Min Jun even asked. He didn't praise her, but when he moved on to the next crisis without question, she understood. Silence could also mean approval. As she packed up for the night, she caught him watching her from his office. Not with suspicion, not with arrogance, with calculation tinged with something else, something she didn't dare name. 4 weeks, she had survived him. Now, she was beginning to unsettle him. And in the shifting gravity between them, Tosin knew the battlefield had changed. The announcement broke like thunder across Seoul's business press. Kong Group appoints Tosin Adebayo as interim COO. Her name glared from headlines in Hangul and English alike. Some praised her quick rise, a fresh, global perspective. Others questioned it. Unprecedented, risky, and proven. But none could ignore it. The Nigerian assistant had become one of the highest-ranking women in Korea's corporate world overnight. At 8:15 a.m., Tosin stepped off the elevator onto the 58th floor. Every pair of eyes turned, some wide with disbelief, others narrowed with resentment, a few grudgingly respectful. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her chin, and walked past them all. Min Jun was waiting in his office, arms folded, expression unreadable. You understand what this means, he said. That I have a target on my back. Tosin replied evenly. That you've had one since the day you walked in, he corrected. Now it's just painted brighter. Her new role didn't come with fanfare. It came with meetings stacked like bricks, contracts shoved across her desk, and directors watching for her first mistake. That afternoon, she presided over her first executive briefing. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Han Dae-shik, the marketing head who once mocked her, leaned back in his chair, voice dripping with sarcasm. So, Ms. Adebayo, you'll be running the show now? Shall we slow our reports down for your benefit, since you're new? A ripple of amusement passed among the older directors. Tosin didn't flinch. She tapped her tablet and projected the latest analytics onto the glass wall. On the contrary, Mr. Han, I expect them faster. Because last week's campaign missed its ROI by 7%, and if that continues, the board will want answers. From you, not me. The laughter died instantly. Silence replaced it, broken only by the sound of Min Jun's pen tapping once against the table. Approval disguised. By evening, she collapsed into the leather chair in her office, exhaustion coiling through her bones. The skyline of Uedo burned with neon outside her window. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She wasn't a shield for Min Jun's storms. She was a storm. Min Jun appeared in her doorway, his tie loosened, eyes sharp but softened by something rare. You held your ground. Did you expect me not to? Tosin asked. He stepped closer. I expected you to be tested. They'll push harder next time. Let them, she said quietly. I didn't come this far to fold. For a moment, silence stretched between them, charged and unspoken. Then he nodded once, as though sealing an unspoken pact. That night, as Tosin walked out of the tower, her phone buzzed with messages, friends, reporters, even strangers flooding her inbox. But it was Tolani's text that made her pause. Seoul finally knows your name. Don't let them forget it. Tosin smiled faintly, the weight of power heavy on her shoulders. Interim or not, she was ready. The boardroom had never felt so sharp. The long glass table glittered beneath the weight of contracts, pens, and men who smelled of cologne and ambition. Every director was present, their suits crisp, their faces carved with the anticipation of blood. At the far end sat Han Dae-shik, leader of the faction that had been whispering for weeks. He adjusted his silver cufflinks, smirking as though the outcome was already sealed. Gentlemen, and Miss Adebayo, he added, voice laced with mockery. We're here to restore stability. Kong Min Jun's leadership has become compromised. His scandals, his recklessness, his favoritism. It's time to vote. A murmur rippled through the room. Some nodded. Others avoided Min Jun's gaze. Tosin sat beside him, tablet poised but heart pounding. The weight of the room pressed on her shoulders, but her face remained composed. Min Jun leaned back, his silence deliberate. He waited until the tension tightened like a string, then rose to his feet. You want to vote? Fine. But I remind you, under Section 4.3 of the Charter, my shares grant me the right to block any motion that threatens this company's stability. Han's smirk deepened. Your stability is the problem. No, Min Jun said, voice cutting like glass. Your greed is. He slid a document across the table. Effective immediately, certain operational powers transferred to interim COO Tosin Adebayo. She now oversees day-to-day execution. If you want to argue incompetence, argue against results, hers. All eyes swung toward Tosin. Her pulse thundered, but she held her chin high. One director cleared his throat. Ms. Adebayo, do you truly believe you can run this company? She met his gaze steadily. I already am. Projects are on schedule. Contracts are intact. Clients remain. If you doubt it, ask yourselves why Kong Group hasn't collapsed while Mr. Kong has been at the hospital these past weeks. The room shifted. Whispers turned uncertain. Numbers, not politics, spoke loudest in these halls, and Tosin had armed herself with plenty. Han's voice cut through the hesitation. This is madness. She's untested, a foreigner. Enough, Min Jun said, his tone final. The motion fails, and if you cannot accept that, you know where the door is. The vote was called. Hands rose and fell, counted by the legal advisor with clinical precision. When it reached Min Jun, he stood tall. I vote no, and I exercise my right to block this coup. Motion denied. The gavel of silence struck the room. Han's jaw clenched, his confidence cracking. This isn't over. It is for today, Min Jun said, gathering his papers. His eyes swept the table, daring anyone to oppose him. None did. Outside the boardroom, Tosin exhaled for the first time in hours. You just risked your position for me, she said quietly. Min Jun stopped, turning to face her fully. For once, there was no mask, no arrogance, just truth. You were never a risk, he said. You're the reason I wanted to fight. And for the first time, Tosin realized the coup hadn't just been about power. It had been about choosing her. The corridors of Kong Group were quieter than usual after the failed coup. Directors who had once strutted now walked with caution, their whispered alliances dissolved in the glare of Min Jun's defiance. But for Tosen, the victory carried a different weight. She had stood in that boardroom, not as an assistant, not as a shadow, but as a force in her own right. And now, she could no longer pretend the battlefield was only about business. That evening, she found Min Jun in his office, standing by the window. Seoul's skyline stretched beyond him, neon lights shimmering over the Han River. His jacket hung over the chair, his tie loosened. He looked less like the Ice Prince, and more like a man standing at the edge of something he didn't yet know how to name. "You should go home," he said without turning. "I was about to," Tosin replied. She placed her tablet on the desk, hesitating. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped closer, each movement deliberate. "Do you think I don't know that?" His voice was low, almost raw. "I don't say things the right way, Tosin. I don't know how, but I will try this once." He stopped just in front of her, close enough that the faint scent of his cologne mingled with the steadiness of her breath. His eyes, usually as cold as winter steel, held something unguarded. "Stay," he said simply. "Not because of duty. Not because I need you to keep this building from falling apart. Stay because I want you here. With me." The word hung between them, heavier than any boardroom verdict. For the first time, Tosin saw the man stripped of armor. Not the CEO who commanded silence, not the Ice Prince of Dispatch Korea's headlines. Just a man who had built walls so high he forgot what it felt like to open a door. Her lips curved, slow, deliberate. "On my terms, Min Jun. Only mine." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "Agreed." As she left his office that night, Tosin felt a shift in the gravity of her world. It was no longer about survival, no longer about proving herself to a city that had doubted her. It was about building something new, power, respect, and maybe something even more dangerous. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, she wasn't just a soldier in it. She was choosing her place, and Min Jun had chosen her too. 6 months later, spring unfurled over Seoul. The Han River shimmered under a sky so blue it looked painted, cherry blossoms scattering petals across the city like confetti. From the 58th floor of Kong Group Tower, the view belonged to anyone bold enough to claim it. Tosin Adebayo stood by her office window, watching ferries carve silver lines through the water. The interim title was long gone. Weeks earlier, the board had voted unanimously to confirm her as chief operating officer. The news made headlines across Korea and Nigeria. From assistant to COO, Kong Group's unlikely powerhouse. Her calendar was still relentless, her inbox endless. But the rhythm was hers now. She was no longer just bracing against the storm. She was steering it. A soft knock pulled her from the window. Min Jun leaned casually against the frame, 2 coffees in hand. His tie was slightly loosened, the Ice Prince edges dulled by something warmer. "You have that look again," he said. "What look?" she asked, accepting the coffee. "The one that decides whether to conquer the next 6 months or dismantle them piece by piece." She laughed quietly. "Maybe both." Later that afternoon, they walked the sky bridge connecting the tower to the new annex. Staff greeted them with ease now, not with suspicion but respect. The whispers that once trailed Tosin like shadows had evaporated. What remained was proof. Deadlines met, projects delivered, crises contained. Halfway across the bridge, Min Jun stopped, hands in his pockets, gaze drifting over the glittering river. "Do you remember your first day? The interview? How could I forget?" Tosin smiled faintly. "You made me rewrite an email and reschedule a minister before I was even hired. And you didn't flinch," he said. For once, his voice carried no calculation. "That's when I knew you'd last longer than 3 months." 3 months, she teased. "That was your prediction? At best." He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You surprised me." That evening, the Civic Center blazed with crystal chandeliers for a charity gala. Seoul's elite swirled in silk gowns and tuxedos, cameras flashing. Min Jun stood tall beside her, unbothered by the press lenses. When introductions came, he didn't say "my assistant," or even "my COO." He said, "This is Tosin Adebayo, my partner in every sense. The words fell into the crowd like a stone into water, sending ripples across a sea of raised brows and calculating eyes. But Tosen didn't care. The people who mattered already knew the truth. Later, on the balcony overlooking the city lights, she asked softly, "Do you ever think about leaving?" "Once," she admitted, "when Seoul felt too cold, too heavy. And now I think about staying. On my terms." He reached for her hand, not commanding, not demanding, just certain. She let him. Below them, Seoul glittered with its usual arrogance. But tonight, it belonged not to the loudest or the cruelest. It belonged to the stubborn. And Tosin Adebayo had claimed her place among them. Thank you so much for staying with us till the very end of the story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear the lessons you learned and your thoughts on how we can continue improving to give you the very best. Here at Munlyt Stories, every tale is crafted with passion, care, and dedication. Our mission is simple: to entertain, inspire, and connect us all across cultures and hearts. So, keep the conversation alive in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Till next time, we are Munlyt Stories, bringing you amazing tales that touch hearts and spark imaginations. Stay blessed. Stay inspired. See you in the next story.